Vampires. We've all seen them. In fiction, that is. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm sort of not extremely interested in vampire fiction. It just doesn't jiggle my jimmies the way it used to when I was a younger lad. But what if I told you I've been reading a series featuring vampires where they're not really the focus point? Rather, they're a vessel for an insomniac kid with major anxiety to go explore the city at night, get himself some friends, deal with his issues, and maybe grow the confidence he needs to fall in love. So, essentially Reddit vampires. Doesn't that sound fun? If that sounds like something you'd be into though, then stick around because today I'll be talking about Call of the Night. I'm 7 books in and I'm really enjoying it, and I figured I'd share my thoughts on it. So let's get into it. Before we get started though, I'd like to welcome you to MangAnalysis, where I do little reviews of the manga I've been reading. If you like what you see and would like to see more, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Maybe even leave a comment. Let's get a conversation going. Let's start with a little summary. Ko Yamori is a 14-year-old high schooler who's sort of not actually going to school. He used to be a model student and a pretty popular guy until he started developing major anxiety, which led to insomnia. Due to those reasons, he's been skipping school. Instead, Ko spends his nights going out and exploring the city. He finds it to be quite different than what he's used to seeing during the day. It's quiet, calm, and full of mysteries. Also, that's when the vampires come out. Ko soon meets Nazuna, a vampire, and they strike a friendship pretty fast. Thing is, Ko's blood is actually quite delicious, so Nazuna wants to keep this friendship going. Like they say, a bite of a friend's neck a day keeps the vampire death away. Ko is surprised that after all these vampire bites, he's not actually turning into one, which leaves him a little disappointed because he's decided he wants to become a vampire. The rule is though, the human must be in love with the vampire for them to turn. It's how they mate. Ko then promises himself that no matter what, he will fall in love with Nazuna and become a vampire, so that he can finally get away from the stress and anxiety the sun brings every morning and be one with the night. So the first thing I'm really enjoying about this manga series is how inconsistent the story format is. I know that sounds weird, but let me explain. Typically, starting maybe at the 4th or 5th chapter of a story, you get a pretty good feel of the format. It might be episodic, a monster of the week, might have a long continuous narrative, different arcs, etc. Call of the Night, 7 books in, has dabbled in pretty much all of those, without really sticking to a particular one. It starts off with this pretty bland, uncertain premise. Ko wants to fall in love with Nazuna so that he can turn into a vampire. Okay, so I guess they need to spend time together, and that's what we see for a few chapters. Just them hanging out, getting to know one another, having some fun dialogue, and that's pretty much it. Then we get introduced to more vampires and things get a little bit more tense. Finally hinting that there may be a new story arc developing or some conflict, but there isn't really any. Then we start having these 2 to 4 chapter long contained little stories, like again Monster of the Week, where Ko and Nazuna help civilians deal with their own issues, and doing those help Ko and Nazuna deal with their own personal issues as well and get closer. So you're like, okay, that's the format. Sure, it contains stories that move the 2 protagonists' stories along little by little, got it. But then those sort of stop for a while and we go back to the slice of life romance, or we may have a few chapters dedicated to some conflict between vampires which seem to be pushing the story in a completely different realm, or we may just focus on Ko and his human friends for a while and pretty much forget that vampires even exist. I actually find that really enjoyable. I'm not a huge fan of the episodic content or the whole Monster of the Week formula, but constantly changing up the pace and format of this series has been really fun and unpredictable. It is weird at first because the question creeps in, is this due to poor reviews which led them to change the story a bunch of times to appease to the readers? But I don't think so. It's very well written and the character development so far has been really nice. Slow but constant. This type of format where the type of storytelling changes all the time is not something I've seen a lot, or at least remember experiencing, and it actually makes me wish more manga would try it out, since it's constantly keeping the story fresh. The next big thing I love about this series is Nazuna herself. She's a really fun, charismatic character. It's hinted that she's this old, powerful vampire, but she's also described as a weirdo oddball, and she doesn't have a lot of friends in the vampire community, or human community for that matter. They really avoid the whole, I look like a 9-year-old girl, but I'm actually 500 years old, so technically it's okay to want to sleep with me, by actually giving her a cool adult design. I like that. She just looks like a 26-year-old art student or something. Her personality is also super fun. So she loves beer and video games and is constantly making dirty jokes, but she's actually kind of a prude and gets super shy and cringy when anyone even remotely mentions love. She can mock Ko for being a horny teenager, but as soon as he exclaims that he's going to fall in love with her, she loses it, gets beat red and runs away. It's really entertaining. She also speaks like an older woman sometimes, but it's not clear if that's due to her age or if she's just trolling the people she talks to, which adds another layer of mystery to her character, I guess. She's also a masseuse, which is fun. She distributes business cards, has people over, gives them a super good massage, and then when they pass out, she drinks their blood, which I guess is not super ethical, but hey, I guess vampires aren't really known for their whole consent, so at least these people get a massage. What really intrigued me about Nazuna is her relationship with the other vampires. They all mention that she's really strong, but we, the reader, don't know why yet. It's not really mentioned that she's the eldest or if age is even relevant to their strength, but they all seem to fear her somehow, at least a little bit, which is interesting because the story isn't really action oriented, but there's always a level of tension between her and the other vampires, so whenever they're seen on screen together, you can't help but wish a fight would break out. If I was to compare Nazuna to any other manga or anime character, it would be a weird homogeneous blend of Nagatoro, Misato, and Hollow, which just so happen to be like 3 of my favorite female characters ever, so that's real neat. Before we move on to the other things, I just want to quickly give a shout out to the dialogue in this series. Honestly, it felt really fluid and really convincing. There isn't a ton of exposition in this series, but the little that we do see is usually given by the reader via dialogue, and it's done superbly well. It always feels natural. These characters feel real and their conversations sound like conversations I've had with my friends, and the questions they ask one another are realistic. Sometimes I find myself reading a manga and it's like, why aren't you asking this question? This is an obvious question. Why aren't you worried about this one thing? But in this series, everything that you feel should be talked about is done very convincingly. It's little things like this that can really help make your world feel real. Okay, so typically in these videos, I try to mention one thing I didn't like about the series. Like one big thing, I guess. Call of the Night doesn't actually have anything that I find glaringly worth mentioning. It's actually a really solid series. However, there are a few minor things, nitpicks mostly, that I feel I should share with you. I find the vampires sort of lackluster in their world building or lore or whatever. Like, it's never really clear what abilities and restrictions vampires actually have in this series. For example, at one point, we see a vampire just fly. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess the vampires fly in this series. It's also never actually explicitly mentioned that they can't go in the sun. That's only until like book 5 or something that's ever mentioned. I guess the author expects you to use common sense, but then, you know, Twilight exists, so you shouldn't really go assuming that people know what's going on, especially when it comes to vampires. It's also mentioned that they're stronger than humans, but not really how or why. At one point it's hinted that they can't really go without human blood, but then way later we found out that they can go without it, but if they don't drink it and then 10 years goes by, they die. But could they just still be okay drinking it once a year, maybe once every 5 years? Why do they feel the need to feed every night? Is it because they're gluttonous and greedy? I don't know. It just feels like there wasn't a ton of thought put into the vampires themselves, like what they can do and whatnot. They're more like a vessel to have our character roam the night, which is okay, but I wish there was a little bit more effort put into the world building there. The other thing, again, about the vampires is that they're all supposed to be these super attractive people, and once you turn into a vampire, you're like automatically attractive. And then we see this one guy get turned into a vampire, and the only real difference that we see is that now he wears nice clothes and got his ears pierced. So it's like, what? I don't know if wearing nice clothes and jewelry makes you inherently more attractive. Is it maybe because they also have like an aura of confidence about them? I wish that was delved a little bit deeper into. There's another thing that's sort of weird in this series that I don't love, and it's that there's a certain haremness to it. I don't really like harems, like I mentioned in a few videos back. Again, you have this one random kid, and all of a sudden you have all these vampire women who could literally have any man ever interested in him. And it's like, why? He's 14, has insomnia, and is kind of awkward. Is it because he allegedly has tasty blood? Is it because they want what they can't have because Nazuna's into him? Who knows? Anyway, those are all the little nitpicks that I could think of. Nothing major, but still worth mentioning. So, should you check out this series? I really think so, yeah. It's actually pretty hard to recommend this series purely based on how difficult it is to define it. It's a bit of a slice of life. There's some mystery. It's pretty funny, but in a low-key sort of way, like entirely dialogue-based. The characters are all pretty interesting, but 7 books in, we still know very little about most of the cast, and Ko, the main character, wears his heart on his sleeve and doesn't really offer anything other than an endless potential to develop into something more, which is fun, but he still just roams the night and helps people, and that's established pretty early on, so the development of our protagonist is sort of slow. Like I mentioned before, the storytelling format changes every few chapters, and while I love it because I think it keeps things really fresh and fun, I could see that the general lack of overarching plot, other than boy wants to fall in love with vampire so he can become one himself, could be a little annoying to some readers. I will say this is one of those series that has a slow build, and if you were to check it out, I would recommend reading the first 2 volumes. It's just I don't think you get a great idea of what this series has to offer with only the first volume. But if what I said in this video interests you, at least even a little bit, then please check it out. I'm enjoying it greatly, and again, I can't really think of anything this series is doing wrong or lacking in, so go for it, chef. Well, that was Call of the Night. If you've read it, please let me know what you think, and if not, are you interested in checking it out? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this little review, and if you did indeed enjoy it, consider subscribing. This was MangAnalysis, and I'll see you in the next one.